Continuing off pretty much immediately after we left, with an episode by Mike Sussman, directed by LeVar Burton. It's got to be weird. I don't know if they did any professional collaboration since then, but I know that on Trek, the last time they did anything like this would have been either during the movies, but he wasn't directing those. So with Burton directing, it would have been back in TNG. So, over 7 years ago at this point. It's got to be weird. Archer has already managed to go up the ladder, get to the thing, had a thrill, but unfortunately he is still in a dream and has to be launched out into space. It's one of those interesting things to think about, isn't it? You're in a burning building. Do you jump? If you jump, you will probably die. If you stay, you will definitely die. Pick. So he goes out. Got him. There's a nice little moment. There's a lot of quiet little character moments here, which are kind of neat. My personal favorite is the bit that I'm mentioning right now. Soong walks up and looks at Malik, who is in the captain's chair. Soong hesitates and is basically standing there waiting for Malik to get out of the chair. Malik doesn't get out of the chair. And then Soong is doesn't say anything, just looks at him like, what are you doing? And Malik's like, oh, right. I suppose I should get out of the captain's chair. And then Soong's like, oh, and then actually sits down in the captain's chair. Okay. I doubt Archer will be after us. Why? Well, because he's dead. Actually, he says it even more casually than I do. As if there's nothing unusual or bad or awful or anything about that. He's just dead. It's whatever. Well, I said no more killing, no more dying. Yeah, what's the problem? They were our enemy. It's okay. We did what we had to. Once again, we see how Soong is getting more and more bothered by all of this, and Malik just really does not give a damn. Credit. Too often, fiction does this problem. I've talked about this many times on this show, where someone is supposed to be uncaring, but they constantly re-emphasize how much they don't care. Pro tip. Someone who doesn't care doesn't feel the need to constantly reiterate that they don't care. Quite the contrary. If that's written well, it's usually indicative of just how much they do care. In this case, though, Malik is both written and acted quite well, and directed while we're on the subject. He really does come across as just being like, what? Yeah, I killed him, and let's go kill this colony. You're gonna kill millions of people? Yeah, that way that'll start a war. And there's nothing there. It doesn't register why Soong would be so wigged out by that. I'm just killing millions of people. What's the issue here? It's like saying, yeah, I'm going to get the curly fries instead of the regular. And someone freaks out at you and you're like, what? It's just curly fries. That's pretty much the level of completely blasé he comes across. And it is good. It does indicate just how much of a horrifically evil human being Malik really is. Soong keeps trying to establish control as a parental figure. He even threatens to send him into timeout, the Targ pit. That doesn't work out super great. This then leads to his discussion. No, we're going to go to the Briar Patch. Ha, by the way. Star Trek 9 reference. But what's funny is if you look at the timelines, it's pretty clear that the Baku would have already settled by now. But it's okay. Unlike some people, I understand that a planet is big, and so they would probably have no problem settling far, far away from them because planets are big. God, I don't want to remember Star Trek 9 again. That movie was so bad. Let's move on to the more interesting part. He brings up the Botany Bay. This isn't just a reference. Malik's idea is that the Botany Bay is something that could be sought out and contains our fellow Augments. We can make something of it. Now, we know that the Botany Bay wouldn't be found for some time, because duh. But what I find more interesting is that Soong shuts that idea down hard, in a way that makes you kind of tilt your head a little bit. Now, this is starting to cross a little bit into theory realm and a little bit of out-of-character knowledge in order to pull in here, but Khan Noonien Singh and Dr. Noonien Soong were both named by the same person, Gene Roddenberry, based on the same person, someone that Roddenberry knew back from real life, back when he was in the Air Force. And so the point is that there is an unintentional, well, I'm saying that wrong. There is an intentional out-of-character connection between the two characters. It has been implied very passively that there might be an in-universe connection, made more stronger by the fact that Soong here is obviously someone who is bothered by the fact of connecting with Khan, and is someone who is very involved with genetics while having a very similar name to him. Huh. Now this could all just be the realm of references, and obviously none of this was planned out. But that's okay. None of this was planned out. The overwhelming majority, like 99% of what we're seeing in Enterprise Season 4 is all backloaded storytelling. They've been handed all this crap, both from the early seasons of Enterprise and from the later stuff that they're trying to connect to, but primarily in TOS and TNG. Those are the two ones they aim for the most. And they're like, okay. And so they improv and they adapt based on what's already there. So based on the circumstances, I find myself wondering if there is an in-universe connection, an intended connection between Khan and Soong. It would be interesting, especially since Soong himself is very anti-violent, speaks of the wars as if they are a terrible thing, and absolutely does not want to hurt or kill anyone. Quite the contrary. He wants to improve the species and make things better, which might further explain why he thinks that way of his ancestor, who had the genetic knowledge and engineering and pushed for this whole thing, became one of the most tyrannical and horrific dictators of that particular era. Just food for thought. It would be an interesting bit of backstory fleshing out. Granted, it pulls in a little bit of small world syndrome, but as I've talked about before, there's a bit of give and take when it comes to small world syndrome if you want to have continuity within your work. And in this case, I think it's a significant enough connection to be worth accepting the small world concept there. If nothing else, it could be like a distant relative, or maybe Soong was actually named after him by someone who venerated Khan. And in either way, Soong was aware of Khan, became fascinated by the scientific side of things, and just disgusted by the morality side of things. So even if he's not an actual descendant, he could still have that character connection to Khan, trying to continue the work of the Supermen, but this time, doing it right. This also shows into contrast his discussions back with Phlox and, Archer back in the first episode. It's a tool that we need to use properly. This gets into a very interesting concept. He is going to genetically engineer them to remove certain sequences that lead to aggression and violence. First point. He now has to, once again, justify himself and explain himself and argue for his case against someone else. That just seems to be his lot in life, doesn't it? In this case, he's saying it to one of his own children, one of the Augments, trying to explain to them what perfecting the genome is like. And they're like, well, no, we don't want to be perfected anymore. And all of a sudden, the perspective is interesting, isn't it? Because switch this around. He's working on a normal Augment, and he's trying to justify it to a normal human. And the conversation would be almost identical. We don't need to be improved. What are you trying to do? You're trying to meddle with this. We just leave us the way it is. Who are you to say it's a defect? This itself is actually a fascinating and very in-depth topic that I do not have I'm going to go with the word knowledge in order to properly discuss. I have only a distant understanding of genetic defects. I myself actually am not exactly what I would call a super specimen, but I only have a few relatively minor issues. Difficulty breathing, the thing with my nose, the fact that my heart doesn't work quite right. The leg is more of a byproduct of an accident, so that's not really a thing. That's about all I got, other than my eyes, which barely qualifies. But I have met and interacted with quite a few people who have things that could be considered defects. And I say it that way because what I find fascinating is so many of them seem to have different perspectives on this. I actually brought this up all the way back in DS9's Melora. Remember that? And I actually got some really cool comments from a lot of people in that one. Now, obviously, I cannot put myself into other people's shoes like that. I can only use my imagination. But some people adhere to the mentality that they are not defective, that they are simply themselves, and therefore there's nothing wrong with what they are and how they are. And then there's some people who would absolutely choose to have those defects, and I put that in quote-unquote on purpose, fixed if the option was given. Ultimately, I tend to be, as I always am, on the side of choice. If you have the choice and ability to choose, then frickin' do it, right? That's my general take on that. But of course, this is where this gets murky. An unborn embryo does not have a choice, does it? And it's pretty easy for this to get too far out of hand and get into Gattaca territory, which, by the way, is a film I highly recommend, if you haven't seen it. It starts off really slow. Give it a bit. Once it takes off really well. Either way, this also ties into something I referenced all the way back in Stormfront, Part 2, I believe. Vosk and Archer have a very brief conversation. In that, Vosk, who has already talked about genetic purity and improving the species, is speaking of using time travel to do it. Here, Soong is trying to use genetic engineering. Both are trying to do the same thing. Both are very different people. Vosk is a zealot and a megalomaniacal maniac. Yes, I know I'm being redundant. I don't care. Because he just wants to have this whole purity, we are the gods kind of a thing. Soong is, well, a scientist. He seeks to improve and to move forward and to learn from the past, showing that he did actually take Phlox's comments to heart and is actually trying to improve things for the next generation. Next iteration, next iteration, next iteration. Get better each time. That's the goal. But we do also see how they've been laying bricks for this, and how it can be very easily seen that the person or people making these decisions can come into question. Is this something that should be decided by group consensus? Should it be up to the parents? If it is up to the parents, do they have to have special circumstances to allow for certain things? Can this only be done to remove certain ideas or concepts or genetic tendencies? Is removing the same as changing in the same way that adding would be? And there's a whole other layer of this that we could go into, which, again, I'm not going to. But it is fascinating how they bring this up, almost without bringing it up. I tend to eat that kind of concept more than when Star Trek tends to shove something into my face as hard and violently as it can. My personal preference. This, of course, leads to, Malik, who is, continuing to be his Darth namesake. He persists in trying to outthink rather than outkill or outshoot. This is actually interesting in its own right, because obviously he doesn't want to kill. He is not a violent person. He does not want to hurt anyone. That has never been his goal. He has been doing this to benefit mankind. What's interesting, though, is there's also another layer here, an elitist layer, but one that's kind of sympathetic. Sympathetic's the wrong word. It's one I kind of sympathize with. If you're good enough, you don't have to kill. This is a quote, I heard it a long time ago. I've actually referenced this before. It was a family member that told me this. It was one of the ideals of military action is that the truly perfect military action will have no losses on either side, because if you are that good, if everything goes that smoothly, you don't have to kill. Killing is what happens when something screws up, when there's a mix-up, or someone catches you, or you fail. And this is an ideal that I admit I've carried with me for most of my life. Hell, this even extends into my fiction. When I'm playing a stealth action game, for example, like Dishonored, or Thief, or whatever, the goal is to ghost, which is actually the furthest extent. That's when nobody sees you, nobody ever texts you, you leave it the exact same way it was. It's as if you were never there, hence the term. There's layers to that. In some cases it's okay to knock someone out. In some cases it's okay to, leave a door open or whatever. You get the point. But I bring that up because under those circumstances, if you're good enough, you don't have to kill anyone. Because you're good enough to not do it. You have proven that level of, there's no other way to put this, superiority. And that kind of lines up with Soong's overall mentality, doesn't it? Being superior enough to not have to kill. Now, I use that word superiority not because I think I am, because obviously I don't, but because Soong clearly thinks that this should be how the Augments are. That they should be good enough to not require going to such barbaric acts. So, this leads to the Kavat colony. Remember that one for later. Malik is like, yeah, let's go ahead and start mass murder millions of people and start an interstellar war in order to serve my own self-interest. And he's just so casual about it. I love it. I love how casually, obliviously evil he is this whole episode. I mean, he's been this way this whole time, but damn. Soong is like, no! God, no! What is wrong with you? And Malik's like, this is the only way to... This is like, what are you talking about? This is our only option. Why is this a problem? What happened to you, father? You used to be okay with mass murdering. No, he never was, Malik. Interesting question, and I actually am going to ask this question of you instead of putting it in the... I should just stop doing those end cards. I keep coming up with questions during the recording that I could have put in the end card. Here's my question for you. Do you think Khan would? Do you think Khan Noonien Singh, would be totally cool with mass murdering people and starting an interstellar war so that he could get away for a bit? Weirdly enough, I don't think he would. I hesitated there so you could answer. But it's my opinion that Khan wouldn't, for one of two reasons. One, because it's wasteful. He wants to rule, not to kill. He is far more of a Revan than a Malik. Reason number two, Khan would find it to be, frankly, somewhat beneath him. Unless he was in a truly desperate state, or completely out of his mind with revenge, which, that was kind of the point of Wrath of Khan. So, we cut to Tucker, who has been avoiding T'Pol. It's a good character scene. I don't actually have much to say, but these scenes are what I was missing in Season 3. I brought this up many times. I wish there had been moments, just singular scenes, developing Hayes and Reed, or T'Pol and Tucker, or Archer and Degra, or whoever, just developing the characters. This is the kind of thing I champion when it comes to television as a media form. Have a scene in the middle of an episode that barely has to do with the episode. It's all about developing a long-term subplot. And in this case, Voyager actually played with this as well, if you're remembering, with Tom Paris, and in many ways with Seven as well. In this case, this is the T'Pol and Tucker subplot, which is kind of developing in the background. We see that Tucker is avoiding her partially because he doesn't know how to deal with this, but also because he is legitimately proud of her, because he understands what she did was a sacrifice. And we see how, once again, the connection between the two is deeper than simply "you're hot" or "I like you," because of the emotional connection the two have. Then we cut back to the episode. Like I said, just scenes like that. That's brilliant. Do more of that. Does New Trek do this? I actually don't know. I haven't seen it. One of these days I'll stop saying that because it'll stop being true. But for the moment, I keep reminding people because every now and again someone keeps asking me, hey, so Malik pushes for the mutiny. We don't get characterization for the Augments, really. We had some for Smike, I think was his name. Ubar was what I had written down. Because that's what his character name is. Yeah, it's Smike, I'm right. We had a little bit for Smike, and then he died. We have a bit for Persis. And we have a bit for Malik, and that's kind of it. But we get characterization simply by virtue of what they are okay with. All of the other Augments are totally cool with mass murder, interstellar war, and killing and torturing people. They are all, by the way they are portrayed in the story, just as bad as Malik. The only difference is he's the one who actually has the lines of dialogue. But they're still completely complicit, not just complicit, fully 100% accepting and embracing of his ideals. We are, in many ways, patterned by who we follow, after all. So that sucks. And we also, of course, see that she's not super cool with this. I like how Soong is mostly disappointed in them. Of course he is. Parent. Then we have a Klingon cruiser, which is catching them. Whatever. I've already made my complaints about how the Klingons are more technologically advanced than the than EarthGov and the Vulcans, and how I feel that was a mistake. Whatever. It's okay, though. Marek secretly dallies with Orion women. Now I'm going to spoil something very, very minor here, but this is a spoiler for a future episode. 3, 2, 1. In the future, we find out the Orion Syndicate is run by the women. Marek has had regular dalliances with Orion women. That could imply a lot, one direction or the other. It is interesting to think about, and I wonder if this is the kind of thread that would ever be continued in the future in a theoretical Season 5. Because think about it. Either he's actually negotiating with the other heads of state, perfectly valid, or he doesn't realize they're the heads of state and the Klingon Empire is being manipulated by the Orion Syndicate, which is, let's be honest, a little bit more likely. Either way. So, Soong is imprisoned by, he gets away, gets picked up by Enterprise, and he's behind bars trying desperately to convince someone of the truth of what he's saying. You're just cursed, Sung. Often wrong, Sung, I think is what the phrase is going to be in a couple generations. Just frickin' cursed. Can't get away from this, can he? Thankfully, and Spiner sells this quite well, at this point he drops almost all facades. There's just an earnest desperation to him in almost every scene from this point. There's even this really great, very minor character beat where he's talking with T'Pol and Tucker. And he tries his little poking, prodding thing that he was doing mostly in episode 1. You know, the affable asshole thing I mentioned. They react weirdly to that, and so he's got the bit of a grin thing until things go different, and it just drops, and he goes right back to being serious mode. Because you can see how much this whole situation has had him completely in a twist. And understandably so, the man is seriously screwed up, and it shows. Worst of all, he knows it at this point. There's this bit where he says, if I had been there for them instead of being locked away, maybe they would have turned out differently. Real question. Do you think they would have? This gets a lot into nurture versus nature. Archer insists they were built to be this way. They were designed to be this way by people who were actually killed by augments. Now, we don't know a lot about the specifics of these specific augments designs, other than the fact that Sung was working under gun, didn't really know what he was doing exactly yet, and honestly birthed them kind of in a desperation maneuver, rather than having the time and effort to be able to process them and do a proper job of it. I bring that up because it's entirely possible that they were just copied off of the previous models, which means they might have been genetically engineered to be horrifically evil. Remember, Persis is the only one who kind of disagrees with that, and even that, it's just her connection to her father, not other people. So, all of them are bad. All of them are totally cool with murdering and killing and torturing. So it's possible Archer is right when he says that there was no other way this would go. But that depends on how you lean on the nurture versus nature argument. Because, wasn't that Trek in a nutshell? No, really. Of all of Trek, its kernel, its central core has always been, and will always be, since the very beginning of TOS, that humankind did better. That we evolved beyond our nature, and we became more than what we were birthed to be. There's a great speech that Kirk gives. We're not going to become killers today. I wish I remembered it word for word. It's actually one of my favorite Kirk speeches in all of Trek. Just today. Today we're going to decide not to be killers. And then the next day. And then the next day. That's core Trek right there. I find myself wondering if they could have been decent people. If they could have been, normal's the wrong word. Not horrifically evil. If they could have found place in society. If they had actually had a loving and caring upbringing. If they had been taken care of. Instead of all of this nonsense. It does kind of shine a light onto why this whole illegality thing is a problem. As I've pointed out before. But Archer does still have a point. There is still so much unknown about this, and Sung's desperation in the matter to violate the law in order to prove his theories is what actually caused this situation. And this, I've probably come across as extremely sympathetic to Sung. But it's worth noting I am not on his side, because what he did was he desperately decided to try and prove that he was right by proving that he was wrong. He didn't do that on purpose, of course, but that is what happened. Rather than trying to take the time or work through the right channels or develop the technology or try and change the laws or anything else that could have been done, and in the idealized future of Star Trek's Earth was actually possible. Here in real life, it's a lot more understandable to rally against the law because the law is a lot harder to change and, let's be honest, a lot less just in real life, no matter where you live. But in the idealized Earth, even Enterprise's era's Earth, he could have championed this cause, pushed for this, and actually tried to do this properly. And we might not have had this incident. Instead, this incident almost guarantees that this is why, even as far-flung as DS9, this kind of genetic tampering is still illegal. Because the one time they tried it elsewise, this happened. Malik has a scene where he kills Persis. Small request. If I was restructuring this episode, I would make a very small change to it. And the biggest change I would make is I would have it so that Persis physically injures Malik in some way that is significant, that hobbles him, and they don't have a doctor, and they have limited time, so they don't have the ability to fix it, which means Malik is now permanently injured for the rest of the episode, and thus makes it easier for Archer to get the jump on him later, or something like that, right? Basically, she damages him in a way that ensures his defeat later, instead of just dying. Mostly her death is a way of showing just how messed up Malik is, because he's just, again, this shows the sociopathy or sociopathy or whatever that is, because he just doesn't care. Like I said back in, I think it was episode 1, whichever one it was, where he straight up lies to her in order to try and ensure that he keeps getting to sleep with her. Here, it's like, do you think I should torture him? No, it's you. I've already figured out it's you, but that's okay. Are you going to use your knife on me? Alright, that's cool, I guess. I guess I'll go ahead and just kill you now. I will miss you. And he kisses her as she's laying there dying, gasping for breath. What the frell? Pardon my Farscapian. Farscapian? So, Archer and Soong both use unique solutions. That's a nice little symmetry, by the way. Soong had to do the thing where she was put in the thermal layer, safe for several hours, so you can effect a rescue. A non-lethal solution. Archer manages to grapple the Klingon's nacelle in order to damage it enough in order to ensure that they can't follow them. A non-lethal solution. Nice touch there. I'll bring that up in a minute, too. Then we find out that the Klingon bridge is protected. Yeah, that makes sense. You'd think most bridges would actually be separate, extra armored or whatever, but as we've seen, Enterprise bridges tend to not be. Let me talk to him. Earnest desperation in his voice. Then, Malik pulls his Khan reference and then blows up the bird of prey. But then sneaks on board just to kill Soong. That scene doesn't need to be there. It does serve one purpose. The fact that Soong is going back in quarters rather than the brig says a lot about how Starfleet and Archer now view the man. If nothing else, obviously the man has done very illegal things and has led to very horrible stuff. He needs to be in prison for a while, at the very least until there's some kind of rehabilitation. But as weird as this may sound, these episodes show that rehabilitation is something he is on a path towards. And, as I pointed out earlier, it's entirely possible that simply locking away the problem wasn't the best solution. It is implied, although never stated outright, that Soong eventually gets released. This is further enforced by the fact that they've actually been saving his work, and all the way up in Dr. Bashir, I presume. I double-checked this just to verify. They mentioned that using genetic modifications in order to cure specific diseases and get rid of certain problems, defects, is something that is allowed as of the time of Deep Space Nine. And thus, we do see that Soong's work does eventually help to cause the medical benefits that everyone had spoken of for the past 3 episodes. We also see a tiny little bit of Klingon politics. As usual, it is what you do and how you react that matters to Klingons. We got attacked by humans. Wait, we'll deal with this. Okay. And so they deal with it. And the Klingons are like, okay, good enough. Like, that's very Klingon. I imagine they actually got some brownie points for how they dealt with the cruiser, to be completely honest with you. Naturally, this leads to... also, the other implication of how Soong gets out. He has to have a kid at some point, so we can get down to often wrong. And then we have to have the wink-wink at the camera about cybernetics. Little bit too overt there, but I don't ding it that much, because it does make sense. Soong has been trying to improve things this whole time, and he has decided this whole incident has proven him wrong. So, like a good scientist, he takes the past, learns from it, and tries something different. I do hope, as always, you have enjoyed. I'll see you next time.